I'm Mark Knoller, CBS News at the White House. I covered a good part of the Ronald Reagan presidency, and one of the earliest memories I have after the 1980 campaign was being in the pool of reporters that flew with then President-elect Reagan to Washington for his first visit after the election. Then President Jimmy Carter sent an Air Force plane to California to pick up the president-elect, bring him to Washington about a week after the election. And I remember being on that plane and looking into the cabin at the front of it and watching Ronald Reagan at a desk there. He had some enormous binders of policy materials, foreign policy, domestic policy, binders, 4 or 5 inches thick. And during the flight, he would glance at it but lose interest and push the binders away from him on the table. It showed me then what we would learn during his presidency, that he was not a detail man. He came to office and was in fact elected into the presidency based on his political and ideological principles, and he left the details to others. And that flight to Washington, his first time as president-elect, certainly underscored that point.
We were going to China with President Reagan, and it was also around the time that he was talking about running again for a second term. And people were starting to say, he was the oldest president elected. I'm not really sure that he should have a second term. That was becoming an issue in the developing campaign. We, meaning myself and our television crew, happened to get down onto the beach one day, and the president was out taking a walk with Mrs. Reagan, and he picked up a coconut and threw it to one of his aides. We took that picture in Hawaii. It showed all over the United States. It showed a fairly vigorous guy for someone who was in his 70s. But it really did show that he was not an old, decrepit guy, that he really still was in pretty good shape. He liked to work out a lot, and it really paid off. But it was really a funny picture to see the president out there throwing that coconut like a football.
I was waiting outside for my cue.
I was invited into what was called a meet and greet with the president, a sort of kick-it-back, light cocktail hour where we had a chance to talk to Ronald Reagan. How did Ronald Reagan start this off? One of the first things he did was reach inside his ear and pull out, very proudly, his new hearing aid. Not the kind of thing you expect to encounter with the President of the United States, especially the President of the United States, who is remembered as the oldest president to take office. But Ronald Reagan was very proud to show us this hearing aid. He then went on to tell us the story that was fairly well known of how he lost the hearing in his right ear. He explained that he was shooting one of those B movies, and a fellow actor shot a blank pistol, a .38 caliber as he described it, too close to his head. And Mr. Reagan told us, I learned that day what a concussion was really all about.
I'm Bill Plante at the White House. When Ronald Reagan was president and I was covering him, he loved a joke, even if the joke was on him. And every once in a while, when the mood struck him, he would turn the tables on himself. Remember that he was hard of hearing and they kept him far away from us, so whenever he was going out to the helicopter on the South Lawn, we would yell questions. Mr. President, what about? Fill in the blank, whatever the topic of the day was. And every so often, he would take it on himself to do this. He would walk out, he would get about halfway down, and with an actor's grace, he would stop and turn toward the camera, and he'd say, well, I don't know. They haven't told me yet.